And same as things like with the Dumerils, Boas, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, it's a boa, so we keep it this way. But then I sort of found them in the wild. They were in the most arid, like red sand, firm red soil, like burrows to escape the heat. And this was a place that had been changed because of agriculture. It was a farming area. So there will be an aspect of that influence on them, of course. But
welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today I'm speaking with Thomas Marriott, who is the editor of the Exotics Keeper magazine, which is a herpetoculture-focused magazine out of the UK. And it's an incredible piece of work. It's actually free for the digital copy. If you live in the UK, for a couple of bucks a month, you can get the actual physical copy. And I just love the idea of returning back to the old days of getting something tangible in your hands. And there's a certain rigor that comes with a magazine that you just cannot get in sort of normal online discourse. So I really appreciate that part of this conversation. But Thomas walks us through his sort of life at this point. He's an incredible world traveler. He's been to some amazing places: Tasmania, Komodo Island, the Galapagos, Madagascar, and he walks us through some of the amazing experiences he's had in those places and sort of some of the information that he's pulled from those experiences that you can actually implement in herpetoculture at home. We also discuss the magazine, Exotics Keeper magazine, what it is, what you can expect from it, what are the goals of the magazine, how you could potentially be a contributor to it, or how you can consume it and become a subscriber to the magazine. And then we wrap up the conversation with this massive survey that they did over at EK, just really surveying what types of animals and who keeps those types of animals in the UK, but also across the world as well. I think they had nearly 7,000 people participate in the study. So it's one of the largest data sets as far as who reptile keepers are, what they're keeping, what species, how many of us are there out there, and it's going to be a useful piece of information moving forward. So we break down all of that. What are the most popular species? How many species are actually being kept, and so on. Let's jump into this episode. Enjoy. Well, Thomas, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Dylan. It's good to be here. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, when I look at your Instagram page, your personal page, you just look like somebody who is an adventurer and a traveler and an explorer. And I think there are certain people that like to stay home and do the home thing, and then there are people that just like have it in them to go out into the world and find things. And that sort of seems like you. Have you always been an explorer or an adventurer?
Yeah, I guess I've always had like a pretty adventurous mentality. I've always been fascinated by wildlife and the natural world, so that's always driven me to do a bit of traveling and things like that. And then I sort of focus my traveling, I guess, around wildlife. Obviously, my career being a journalist and sort of constantly working from home, like, has sort of allowed me to travel alongside it as well, which has been really, really cool in recent years. I can also manage my workload in a way that sort of has given me the opportunity to go on some pretty extended trips to some pretty cool countries. So yeah.
So did you go to school for journalism?
Yeah, so I studied English and media at university. So academically, it's definitely that route that I'd taken. But I was always sort of passionate about herpetology. At sort of school, I was pushed down following what I was good at rather than the sort of things that I was, really enjoyed. So I went down the journalism route. And yeah, rather than biology, I really loved reptiles and amphibians, but I didn't get on so well with some of the other aspects at sort of A level and that kind of thing. So that my career certainly followed the journalism route, and now I've managed to sort of combine it with my personal interests of herpetology. So on whilst sort of traveling, I was writing blogs on herpetofauna and things like that, and then combined it into a career that's sort of been sort of excelled with EK and a few other projects. So yeah.
I mean, it seems. Did you do any journalism work before working for EK? Like, were you doing like conventional stuff, like reporting stories and whatnot?
Yeah. So during university, I was doing a few placements for like regional newspapers, and then I also did some work in PR for a little while. So yeah, no stranger to any like press releases. And then I sort of went on to I did the sort of gap year thing a little bit late, and went to Australia for a year. I sort of reconnected my my passion for writing with wildlife and sort of writing up some of the experiences that I had over there. So yeah, it's definitely like a culmination of interest and experience where I'm at now.
Yeah, because it sort of seems like a dream role in some ways. Like you are a good writer, so that that's a good skill to have. But it can be tough to fold something like herpetoculture or just reptiles into that world. So to become an editor of exotics, I think your editor is your title as an exotics keeper magazine. That really seems like a dream role.
Yeah, yeah, massively. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I really couldn't predict it to be honest. I sort of fell on my feet with that role, and as the magazine's grown, my role's sort of changed now. So uh, for a start, I was sort of writing a good sort of majority of the content, and now I'm sort of very privileged to be working with a lot of different really talented writers that as more of an editorial role and taking on freelancers and things like that. So um, yeah, it's brilliant to be part of a project and see it pretty much from the start. I joined EK when we were about 3 issues in, I think. So, and then I've been there for almost 3 years now. So, yeah, really seen it grow. And yeah, as I say, managed to juggle my traveling, my own personal interests, going and speaking to some amazing people, visiting some really amazing collections, some zoos. Um, yeah, all sort of things that I would love to do in my spare time,
Hmm.
and I get paid for it. So yeah,
Yeah, that's a
pretty
big
roll.
bonus.
It's yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I want to get back into the EK magazine and learn more about its sort of origins and whatnot. But also you'd mentioned wildlife and nature being a big part of your life early on. What capacity were animals in your life as a child? Did you have pets, or were you just kind of watching the nature shows?
Yeah, no. So I grew up like my family. My dad has always been very sort of outdoorsy, so I spent a lot of time outdoors. My granddad had quite a big collection of exotic birds, so he used to bred a lot of different birds, but like mostly like owls. But he had different
Oh
parrots. He
wow.
bred sort of African greys and Amazon greens, I think, Amazon blue fronted parrots and things like that. So I was sort of always exposed to exotic animals, but I was the only one really that was into reptiles. I don't know exactly what it was that sort of triggered it, but from a young age, I was sort of going around charity shops with my pocket money and sort of buying books about reptiles. And you go in and everyone had their new favorite book at primary school, and it'd always be like non-fiction stories and things, fiction stories and that. And I'd have this non-fiction book about some obscure salamander somewhere, and yeah, it's sort of like spiraled from there, I guess. Yeah, so I yeah spend a lot of time outside, and yeah.
And then did you get into keeping reptiles yourself as a child?
Yes, sorry, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, about when I was about 10 years old, I had my first leopard gecko.
Mm.
Before that, I actually had a budgie as well. So my granddad took me to one of the parrot shows that we have here. I think it was Staffordshire Parrot Show, like one of the big ones, and got me a budgie. So that was my first real pet. And then about 10 years old, I got my first leopard gecko. And obviously obsessed. Spent many years and prior to that actually reading all these little, books and stuff on how to keep them. And yeah, had Leo for I think about 13 years, and she was sort of sub-adult to adult when I first got her. So yeah, she played a big part in my life. But that was about it. Like I've never had like a massive collection of reptiles. Obviously, doing a bit of traveling myself, I do keep some Dendrobates tinctorius, the blue ones, the Azaraeus,
Mhm.
and I can sort of get involved with that sort of hands-on stuff as well. But yeah, like right now, it's not the right time for me to have a huge collection. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I enjoy speaking to people about it.
yeah,
Asking them the
yeah.
questions.
Well, I'm in a very similar boat. I have a pretty small collection, and it's tempting to want to like. I just came home from an expo, and like the same thing always happens. Yeah, of course you like want to buy new things, but also like because I'm interacting with all these people who are experts at what they do, it makes you feel like you want to get involved, like hands-on as well. Like I feel like I want to start some sort of project or breeding thing just to get that experience. But at the same time, you kind of have to remember like your lifestyle and how busy you are. Are you away? Does it make sense to add this in? Eventually, I think those are things that we could add to our lives, but you kind of have to make sure the time is right.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to sort of reflect on where you're at in life and what's right for you at the time. You can still learn a hell of a lot from people, experienced breeders. Go out and just ask the questions, get really stuck in. And I'm very fortunate to do what I do, and learn alongside it. So in terms of having a collection, there's a whole bunch of species that I would love to keep one day. But space, money, time, permitting.
Hmm. And so when you leave, do you have someone to come watch the frogs for you?
Yeah. So my mom's actually pretty good at looking after the frogs. Yeah. She's sort of got her head around looking after the flies and stuff. So yeah, it's been quite good. I've recently got back from sort of 5 months in South America, and she looked after them the whole time. And yeah, I think if I was to go for something, a big constrictor or something like that, I might have to change my animal babysitter. But
Yeah,
for
yeah.
now, it's working. Yeah.
Yeah, especially for that long stretch of time. I'm going to be leaving here for maybe like a week and a half in a couple, at the end of next month, and my mom's going to stay here because she's going to watch our place and whatnot. But it's very much like she's just going to look at the animals. I have some larger constrictors as well. It's like there's no capacity she can be able to care for them except for just sort of look to make
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
nothing's gone
exactly.
wrong. Like I might have someone come here to change waters, but yeah, I mean it's something you have to think about, especially if you're gone for huge stretches of time. That's like you can always get into keeping these things later in life. I would love to talk about your travels because you just mentioned that you were basically in South America for almost 4 months or 5 months, but that was just the most recent thing. It seems like you've really been like all over the place.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate to visit a lot of places. I guess I started traveling actually just before sort of uni and did some interrailing around Europe, and then that sort of sparked an interest. And then I went to stay with some friends in Malaysia and Singapore and did the whole Thailand thing, but slightly different. I was going out to national parks and sitting there watching the flying lizards go from tree to tree and things like that. There was still a few sort of like full moon parties and stuff, but like that sort of sparked my interest for really getting out there and seeing sort of herpetofauna in its natural environment. And yeah, it wasn't long. Basically, came back, finished my degree, went straight out to Australia, stopped in Komodo on the way, and travelled a bit more Southeast Asia, a few spots. Uh, yeah, around Vietnam, Cambodia. There's sort of recently went to South America, Madagascar. Yeah, there's been quite a few places. It's yeah, it's been good.
What was the experience on Komodo like?
Komodo, yeah, incredible, absolutely incredible. Like from my perspective, like I'd I'd gone there actually. So I was staying in Bali for a little while on the way to Australia, and at the time that was a big sort of bucket list thing for me to do, to go and live in Australia. And then started getting, I guess, a bit greedy with my bucket list sort of ambitions, and went, no, I'd love to see Komodo dragon as well, and go and visit Komodo. Now, this was at a time before I was sort of really involved with the sort of herpetoculture, herpetology community. And so I went there, yeah, as a tourist, but in the middle of sort of wet season. And at the time, the Indonesian government was putting sort of pressure on having the park open. And yeah, it was like closing randomly. They weren't telling tourists. Like a lot of the flights were getting cancelled because they just weren't getting filled up. And it was a little bit of a sort of like turbulent time to sort of get over there. But I thought, right, this is my one chance to go and do it. So flew from Bali over to Labuan Bajo, and then jumped on one of the boats out to Komodo. I was very lucky in that week they did actually let tourists onto Komodo. Um, but yeah, as I say, like people are sort of saying to me now, "Oh, did you go and speak to this person? Did you see the Trimeresurus, the blue vipers out?" And all these questions. I'm like, if I did it again, I would have, but like at the time, no, it was different. But it still didn't sort of change anything for me in terms of like I was just blown away, like fully jaw open at the sight of these wild Komodo dragons. Like it was incredible. So that really did spark an interest. And at the time, I hadn't done anything sort of even remotely professional in terms of herpetology or herpetoculture or anything like that. So but I did meet a zoologist out there who was like, she was really into ornithology, and we were sort of talking about different things. And then you sort of meet these people that are like experienced zookeepers and sort of academics, and they it did certainly like spur on like more of like an interest to sort of follow this route in sort of writing something about wildlife.
Hmm.
And then in Australia, again, met a herpetologist who's still a very good friend of mine, who at the time was like, yeah, let's go out herping. Let's go out and look for shingleback skinks and things like that, just around Perth. And um, he's like an evolutionary biologist doing his PhD at the minute, very, very intelligent bloke. And he really sort of spurred on that sort of, yeah, you can do it. Like you really don't need to, if you've got a passion and drive to go and learn, just go and do it. Go and speak to people. And he put me in contact with some conservation projects that were working with Caladina collii, but I think it's oblonga now. But some of the snake neck turtles over there,
Mm.
and started writing things up there. So it was, yeah, like these sort of experiences when you go traveling and you go for a sort of tourist perspective and you do the sort of things that are quite accessible to people, can really give you a bit of a sort of nudge in the right direction to go and sort of follow your passions and things that maybe at the time I thought were completely well out of the way. The idea of having a magazine by the end of it, but like going and speaking to zookeepers, doing in situ conservation work and organisation, all these sort of things that I just thought, oh well, nobody's going to want to speak to me.
Hmm.
These sort of experiences where you drop yourself into the middle of it are so valuable. I would certainly urge anyone that gets the opportunity to travel to remote places in whatever capacity to follow up on that for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a testament to how important it is to have connections with people because, quite often people, it depends on what type of your personality you have, but there's a lot of people that are just like, I need to do this on my own. I want to figure this out on my own. But as soon as you start interacting with people, you get inspired and they point you in the right direction. They're just, yeah, it's invaluable for sure. What is Komodo Island like? Is it just nature or is there actual structures on the island?
Yeah, there's a small village on Komodo. The
Mm.
Komodo National Park sort of encompasses Komodo, Rincha, and a few other islands. But yeah, there's also like it's mainly like a marine park for a lot of people. Like
Mm.
that's albeit obviously Komodo dragons, sort of flagship species. Like a lot of the ecotourism industry that's out there is sort of centered around diving, and that is incredible. Like they tend to run these boat tours from La Bombajo, and you see the Komodo dragons, but they also incorporate snorkeling, things like that. But we're seeing like manta rays and all sorts of like incredible sort of wildlife there. So it's just essentially like a big protected area, a few different islands. There's also there's another island that's got like a big viewpoint on it as well. It's sort of if you typed it in Komodo National Park, it's that one, but that's not actually Komodo Island. And yeah, and obviously being in sort of East Indonesia, it changes throughout the year as well. So I think we went in the middle of sort of wet season, which it was beautiful. It was absolutely stunning. It looked just like Jurassic Park. It's a bit of a cliche thing to say, but then you see photos of it in dry season. It's a completely different picture. So yeah, really interesting part of the world. Really interesting sort of area. I believe the town on Komodo is growing. Like it seemed like there's more sort of industrial sort of not like more development
Mm.
basically on the island, and I've heard that there's been some land bought up for hotels and stuff
Okay.
recently. So it's a concern. But then there's also been a period of the park being closed. There's been fluctuations in prices for sort of admission to the national park. So I think it's a part of the world that's sort of changing massively. If you get the opportunity to go, definitely go. But I don't know whether that's only time will tell to see whether that's like going to be beneficial to the wildlife and protecting these areas stronger, or whether it's actually just going to sort of go the opposite way.
Right. It must be kind of bizarre seeing wild Komodo dragons roaming around.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. But then in a way, like obviously you're taken back by the size of them. They're immense creatures, like just incredible. But then you also realize that they are just like big lazy monitor lizards. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like they're really like opportunistic. They sort of hang around like the sort of built up areas, probably looking for scraps and things like that. They so you see these sort of this footage of them fighting during like breeding season, and it's like really sort of like incredible, like primal sort of like creatures. But then when you actually see them, they're pretty
Lumber
chill, and you
along.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Like the tour guides are sort of walking around with sticks just in case they get a bit aggressive. But it's bizarre. Like that is their sort of form of defense. But also, if you see any of the Asian water monitors anywhere else in sort of Southeast Asia and sort of Bangkok, where they're just chilling in parks and things like that, it's kind of a similar thing. But just the sheer size of them is just amazing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So, out of you've been to so many different places. You mentioned, Madagascar, South America, and whatnot. Are there particular animal related experiences that you had along the way that stand out?
Honestly, I've got so many. Like they're sort of countless. Yeah, like I'll be here all day if I start getting stuck into all the experiences. There's a few that stand out for like different reasons. Um, but like strangely enough, like I've seen some really interesting herps in my time. But like there was a time when I really wanted to see a platypus when I was in
Mm.
Australia. I was there for a year. I didn't spend well, I spent like less than half my time on the east coast, so not a lot of time in sort of platypus sort of range. But while I was there, I was desperate to see one, and then got down to Tasmania, and there was a river. I was staying in Hobart, and it was the first time I was cold for a long time. I was like, well, this is it was strange enough as it is. And but I'd heard that there was like a river running through this city, and there was supposed to be a population of platypus there. I spoke to a few people around the cities in hostels and things like that. This hadn't seen one in forever, and I started walking up this river, and had my headphones in, wasn't paying too much attention to be honest. And there was a brewery sort of right at the end, so that was like my end goal. And it started absolutely chucking it down with rain. And then I suddenly heard this sort of dog bark and turn around and seen this like wild platypus, and it was like enormous because everything in Tasmania just is huge. Like because they like the echidnas, the platypus, they all have like really thick fur, so they look a lot bigger.
Mm.
Same as like the tiger snakes are like on different islands, they're different sizes, but they're all like pitch black. Like they're like it's just an amazing place to go anyway. But this platypus was just in this river, swimming around, like just doing weird platypus stuff, you know, like, and I just sat there in the rain. It was absolutely chucking it down. I was soaked, and just watching this animal. And it sounds weird because it's like, oh, Komodo dragons, yeah, like they're amazing, fierce creatures and things like that. But this, like, I just captivating watching this animal that you're not going to see anywhere else in the world, you know, doing its thing in like not even that far from a city as well. Like that was really cool.
And just one of
Um,
the weirdest animals on the planet, really.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was something like because you know you don't see them in zoos. You can't really even picture what they look like until you
Yeah.
see them.
How big? How
Um,
big are they? Like, how big would a big one be?
this one was like a good size, like maybe like a couple of foot long, maybe. I don't know whether I'm remembering that right, but it was a good
Yeah.
size. I think the ones on the mainland are much smaller. Um, but yeah, it was it just so strange. And you know when you think like that, there's a strong possibility that I'll never get to see that animal again. Well, certainly not that animal again, but do you know what I mean? A platypus
Yeah.
ever again. And that was quite interesting. Like that certainly stands out as a you know a standout sort of wildlife experience. But you know, there's been other encounters, things like seeing Parsons chameleons in
Mm.
Madagascar, incredible, you know, reptiles, the sort of things that you read about as a kid, and you go, wow, look at you know these chameleons, they go massive. And then you start unearthing sort of more information about them and their long gestation periods and the amount of time that you know that it's just amazing. Like, yeah, there's been quite a few encounters in my life that I certainly sort of take me back a bit when I think about them. Like we've just come back from on this last trip. We went to Galapagos as well, and that was really cool. The giant tortoises there again, just roaming free. Like we were, um, on our bikes, basically cycling down this road. Huge Galapagos giant tortoise in the road, and you can just stand there, just watch for 20 minutes, half an hour, and nobody else around. Just and they're the sort of experiences that I really do take me back because you just connect. You
Yeah.
connect with these exotic animals that you're never going to see in that capacity again.
And you also have a keen ability for photography. Is that something that you've just developed over the years of doing this traveling?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, like I'm not. So I've just picked up a whole bunch of tips. Like I've I think anyone that's into reptiles and amphibians like has a bit of a sort of interest in photography in a way. Like a lot of the reasons why we love these exotic animals are, just how strikingly beautiful they are. So
Hmm.
um I know there's a lot of overlap with sort of macro wildlife photography and like herpetoculture and herpetology. Um, so yeah, I actually had a camera from work that was a really old. It must be 10 years old, like a really old Canon 100 and something. And I bought a macro lens for it before the South America trip. And over that time, actually encountering other people and watching their tips, watching how they photograph and just passing on sort of word of mouth tips has sort of helped me really refine that. Um, I was lucky enough to go out with a sort of professional photographer who was working on a reserve in Ecuador so I just went out herping for a couple of nights, and just all these sort of interesting tips of how to make the most, because I only had a tiny little pocket size sort of diffuser, and how to make the most of that. And then obviously watching videos and seeing how other people have their setups, and yeah, like actual photography experience. Like I just take a camera out with me every now and again. Sometimes my
Yeah.
phone actually does a much better job, but in recent sort of trips, I've definitely found myself just asking more questions on the photography side of things. And I think that's it. That's how you like develop knowledge over time. And some of these, yeah, it almost feels like I'm cheating in a way because again, yeah, if you get the diffuser closer, change the settings here, all these sort of little things that probably only really apply if you're taking pictures of something really small or potentially something dangerous. We were photographing a lot of vipers and things like that, so you have to learn ways to do these things safely and do
Mhm.
and you can't really pick up those sort of tips online very easily. So yeah, again, that's a direct result of getting out there and speaking to people that are actually doing it and doing it alongside them, going and traveling and just yeah, picking up little tips along the way.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, hands-on experience is really the ultimate experience. And as far as that South America trip, was it sort of planned out and sketched out where you're going to be at what times, or did you just go and then travel around?
Yeah, no, we had Ecuador planned in a way. Like I knew that we wanted to go to Galapagos. We wanted to go to Galapagos first because it was going to cost us a fortune. So we'd planned that part, and we flew into Quito. And I'd spoken to a few herpetologists, a few in Mindo up in the cloud forest, one in Ecuador, in the Amazon, close to Tena. Um, and we obviously had the Galapagos flights and an aspect of that trip booked, a few accommodations and things like that. At the time, because we were expecting to be there for like 3 months and we were working UK hours, so we were getting up at sort of 3 in the morning and
Oh,
powering through work. Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And then finishing work, going and hiking up a volcano or something like that. Like it was some pretty tiring stuff, but we I really didn't expect us to be moving at the pace that we did. So yeah, we Ecuador was planned, and then we wanted to go down to Cusco and see Machu Picchu and do the Inca Trail and that sort of thing, and obviously plan these things around weekends and bank holidays and things like that. And And then I think we just got a little bit sort of like carried away with it. So it was me and my girlfriend that went out there, and we were both working and both traveling at the same time. So I had a few connections in South America to sort of try and get some stories and go with it. But after we got to Peru, we just sort of went, right, let's keep going then. So then we ended up into Bolivia, went up to Lake Titicaca, and through Bolivia down into like Chile, Argentina, Brazil, like all quite quick visits after Bolivia, to the point where then we got there and I was like, okay, well, it's winter in South America. I completely forgot that hemispheres do their thing. So we eventually got to Brazil, and I mean, it was nice weather, but it wasn't sort of herping season. So a lot of my friends that were going out and doing sort of field herpetology had all flown north to the Amazon at that point. So we were like, okay, we'll go up to Central America and spend a bit of time in Costa Rica, Panama, and then actually our last country was Guatemala, and that proved to be probably my favorite, like outside of Galapagos as its own sort of entity, because that was incredible. But yeah, Guatemala was amazing, and we got to do some really cool stuff there. There's a British herpetologist called Roland Griffin, who is the director of conservation at the zoo there, Zoologico La Aurora, and he showed us a few different conservation sites and reserves, and also the Guatemalan beaded lizard breeding project and the Bronia breeding project that he's working on there. So that was the perfect culmination of sort of we spent a bit of time on the beach, a bit of time seeing some tourist spots and Tikal and the Mayan ruins, but also some serious herpetology, speaking to the right people in the right places as well, which is really nice.
I just want to take a short break from today's episode to thank each and every one of you for tuning in today. If you would like to show more support for the podcast, you can do that by checking out the show's sponsor, Custom Reptile Habitats. There is an affiliate link in both the YouTube description and the show notes. If you do make a purchase through that link, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. The other way you can show support to the podcast is through the Patreon account. For as little as 75 cents per episode, you will automatically be added to the Discord server so you can communicate and chat with other like-minded keepers. If you do bump yourself up to the $5 a month tier, you'll have early access to the episodes and the opportunity to submit questions to upcoming guests. Again, I am so grateful for each and every one of you. This podcast is a lot of work and costs me a lot of money each month to run, and any support coming from your end is greatly appreciated. Back to the episode. That sounds amazing. I mean, what is it like? Were you able to work? I'm guessing you were. You were able to get something accomplished. But I always imagine what it must be like to be able to work from home, but then also be doing it in a different country. Like you'd wake up and do your work, and then go outside, and you're in Peru.
Yeah, like it was pretty intense. It was good fun. It was very good fun, and the thing is with my work, like I'm so passionate about the project itself, so I get really stuck into what I know the project inside and out, because I manage almost all aspects of it. So I know what needs to be done and when, and can prioritize it, albeit on not a lot of sleep for the last few months, to be totally honest. So actually that side of things works quite well, because I will know okay, if I can get all of this done one day, then when we go out, we can go and explore this new city and stuff. And then the next day I might say, right, you know what, I'm actually just going to have to spend a few extra hours in the evening to get on top of this. And, I can sort of manage that time in a way that, that allowed us to go and, experience these countries. There was obviously like some days through the week when we'd be saying, right, you know what, we're actually just going to stay in and order a takeaway and put Netflix on, which seems bizarre in a new country, new city, but it had to happen. There was other days when we'd be up at sort of 2-3 in the morning, work a full day, hike up an active volcano, camp, then the next day so it was just about juggling it, really. And it's a lifestyle that I would love to do. I would love to do more of that. I think, I'm flexible with my hours. My girlfriend was her job was a bit more sort of strict on when we needed to work. But,
I was going to say, was it necessary for you to be up in UK times? But I guess for her, probably it did.
Yeah,
phone calls and whatnot.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like she did need to be in basically a morning meeting almost every day. So it meant that either way we were getting up. So it made more sense to sort of work on the same time schedule and then go and experience things together rather than, me trying to juggle things around because I was tired or something and do it the other way. Plus, a lot of the things that I was doing, or in terms of going out and herping and things like that, realistically, the next day I'd be writing the story up, and it didn't really feel like work.
Mhm.
Like if I can go out and speak to somebody about reptiles all day and spend the whole next day writing it up into a story, it's really quite enjoyable. So yeah, on that side of things, it was an experience, and it's yeah, absolutely incredible. But yeah, hard work alongside it.
Yeah, absolutely. And during these experiences of being like boots on the ground in the wild, is there anything you pulled away as far as keeping herps privately? I know you said you have a small collection of dendrobates, but you also you're immersed in this world, and there's always a different amount of knowledge you can get from being there. And I know you did a piece on the Madagascar or on Dumerils boa and things like that. As far as like are we keeping these correctly? Are there certain things that you've pulled from those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like broadly speaking, it's more along the lines of sort of contextualizing animals in the wild. You know, there's certain things that you just, when you're keeping things, even like as an experienced keeper, you sometimes can fall into the trap of going along with what other keepers are saying without necessarily sort of seeing it for yourself. There's been times when, you'll go out, say, for example, with poison frogs, we have this sort of fascination with having bromeliads in every single tank, and that is the way it's done, and it's a necessity and all of this. And to a degree, yes, they do need these little pools of water. It makes sense within a captive environment to make the most of what you have, and they're perfect plants for that. But then in the wild, 90% of the sort of frogs that I was seeing were in leaf litter and rotten wood and jumping around in that. And yet we don't put the same sort of emphasis on the importance of having thick layers of leaf litter or
Mm-hmm.
having, rotten wood in the enclosure, and same as things like with the Dumerils boas, you know, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, it's a boa, so we keep it this way. But then when I sort of found them in the wild, they were in the most arid, like red sand, firm red soil, like burrows to escape the heat. And this was a place that had been changed because of agriculture. It was a farming
Right.
area, so there will be an aspect of that influence on them, of course, but without sort of seeing, it's very easy to just fall into patterns of sort of discourse and rhetoric around how we should be keeping animals without sort of seeing just how sort of adaptable they are in a way, and also learning our own limitations on how animals are in the wild. In Australia we had a, a group of white tree frogs outside my bedroom door, like every night for in this place that I was staying. They lived in a bin. There was like five of these frogs in the bin, and they were great. They were really healthy condition every night out, sort of hunting and things like that. But they would sit on this bin, and in the day they'll go in the bin. And I'm not saying keep white tree frogs in the bin, like before. Don't quote me on that. But like these animals have these specific needs that is very hard to paint a full picture of
Mm-hmm.
with just a captive sort of setting. But we can sort of expand our sort of understanding, I think, by employing sort of new techniques, new, like, changing our husbandry practices, evolving with different things. People sort of say, oh well, you can, when people suggest to bigger enclosures, where's the limit? And I understand that. Like, I fully get that there needs to be a point when actually it's practical for people to be able to keep reptiles, and that their needs are being met, and that's the important thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like if you've got the opportunity to create bigger enclosures and to have sort of explore different micro habitats within that enclosure and just see what the reptiles and amphibians are sort of responding to. There's certainly ways of sort of advancing your own sort of herpetoculture without sort of stagnating with these patterns of how things have always been done, because it's pretty surprising when you see these animals in the strangest places.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and you had written just a short piece. I don't know if it was in the September or August issue, just about rainbow boas and where they're commonly found. And in the article, you actually say, they're almost strictly arboreal, which is something that you don't hear a lot of people say. But when you talk to people in those places who go look for those animals, they're often found in trees near some sort of water source, whether it's a river or a small creek or whatever, or some sort of floodplain. And it's just fascinating to hear that, considering how often those animals are kept in humid conditions, but often not places where they can climb or even soak or swim. And they're a very aquatic and arboreal species.
Yeah, well, so that was just in the experience of the person that I was, or the people that I've spoken to in sort of
Right.
Costa Rica and Ecuador. When you speak to guides, there will be an aspect of, um, you know, where they're searching for these animals, also where they're going to be most highly visible as well. So,
Yes. Yeah.
that will play into it as well. I don't think that they're necessarily like strictly arboreal, but I do think that there's certainly an aspect of their natural behavior where whenever I spoke to people, it's close to ponds and rivers, and sometimes quite large rivers and sort of overhanging trees and things like that, where these rainbow boas tend to frequent, especially during the day. Um, and it's it's something that's probably not considered very highly in herpetoculture. Is it something, do we necessarily need to have, would we place more sort of emphasis and priority on having an arboreal enclosure? I'm not sure, but
Hmm.
it's because we're all going to have space limitations, but it's definitely something that should be explored. It's the same as bearded dragons. You often see them quite high up on perches and stuff that are sometimes meters off the ground. It's not practical to tell everyone that they need a huge arboreal enclosure for a bearded
Hmm.
dragon. It's just not going to work. And even implementing electrical components successfully for an enclosure that's built up like that would actually probably mean that most people probably go wrong in their husbandry practices. But it's definitely something that we should be considering. We should be asking these questions, and exploring different ways of making that happen.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, offering just different ecological niches within that environment, I think, is key. Let's jump into the magazine, because you mentioned, obviously you mentioned you're writing for it, and you got to do a lot of that while you were traveling, and it's sort of a dream position for you, combining both worlds, your passion and what you're good at. How did Exotics magazine or Exotics Keeper magazine enter your life, and how did the magazine start in the first place?
I stepped in from February 2021. At the time, there was quite a few of us. So there was myself. We had like a full-time designer who's now a freelance designer, but he was also handling some of the aspects, some of the more logistical aspects. We had a supporting sort of writer she just finished her herpetology degree at Bangor. And we had a videographer that was supporting us as well. So over time, that's sort of changed, and our approach has sort of changed as well. So we were trying to be really quite inclusive of exotics, and doing aquatics features on parrots, features on small mammals, and it was like an interesting take. So like some people really loved that; they loved the breadth of it. But then it also meant that some people were perhaps not getting what they wanted from that
Hmm.
magazine. We all know, like, herpetoculture, people are sort of that you do get a lot of dedicated enthusiasts that really want to get stuck into these sort of projects, but realistically, if they're reading a magazine that doesn't have really what they want, if it's only one article that appeals to them, that's not great. And then so over time, like the content's changed, the structure's changed, As I mentioned, I'm sort of now managing freelance writers. So we've now got a vet on board. She writes articles for us every month. We also have sort of more input from hobbyist breeders. So especially when somebody has, bred something really interesting, they can tell us about it. I think that is a massive sort of bonus of the magazine. So
So do you go find those people? You find them on Instagram and you shoot them a message? Because I know you had Roy from Project
yes,
Herpeticulture, he Wellspring Herpeticulture, write a great article on alligator lizards. So do you just find them and go, hey, do you mind writing an article?
yeah. Well, this is like one of the great things about sort of social media is, herpetoculturists are generally quite, outspoken and keen to sort of present their sort of successes online. So being in the right groups and knowing the right people and basically shooting everyone a friend request as soon as I see that they've done something really cool, is a massive benefit, and people are quite keen to write things up, and it's honestly great to see, because I think one of the great things that EK does is it gives people a platform. It gives hobbyists and breeders a platform to share their knowledge. And we have constantly within herpetoculture people, the discussion around private keepers and zookeepers, and why is there not more sort of a better relationship there, because we're all trying to share our knowledge. And I think realistically, we need more platforms that are sort of well managed and that people can access, that have these sort of enthusiast stories telling
Mm-hmm.
people exactly how they've done things, because hobbyists and breeders are, yeah, very keen to share their information. I think I've heard from a few people in zookeeping circles in the past that they try and keep their own sort of methods to themselves, because because of money reasons and all that. And it's honestly just ridiculous, because as soon as anyone manages to successfully breed a species in captivity, there's been very few people that I've approached and said, would you mind, either speaking to me about it, we do an interview and I'll draft up a story, or write it yourself, that have ever turned around and said no.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
I
not
keep
doing
those
that.
secrets myself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a strange sort of rhetoric to hear, because yeah, most people are very sort of forthcoming with how they operate within herpetoculture, because it's all these different ideas and opinions and thoughts and perspectives, that if we can present that in a magazine, especially in a way that has sort of veterinary advice next to it. We've got some conservation stories from different organizations across the world. We've got stuff on from zookeepers talking about this more obscure species, and in a way that's sort of responsible, and we can present that information for people to sort of make their own mind up from.
Totally. I mean, and it's very much like I was saying this to someone else the other day who's working on. Actually, it was Bill Strand who has this kind of a chameleon journal that he's doing, and I was saying to him, it's like a very retro feel, like we're almost getting back to like the '90s of these magazines or these journals, and I think we're going through a curve in our ability to access information. We're almost regressing, and not regressing, going back to like magazines and journals and things that people actually really like to learn. And when I flip through your magazine, that's what it feels like. It reminds me of when I was a kid and I would get magazines in, and every page is different. There's a whole bunch of different topics that all fall within herpeticulture, and I feel like it's a good thing that we're moving back towards that rather than the Facebook posts and the forums and whatnot, because I think that's kind of I think we've hit a limit with the ability to share good information there. And it's like, okay, we actually want someone spending the time to go through and edit things. And yeah, it's not going to be instant, but next month you're going to have a great article about this thing, rather than, later today with a guy who's just like typing on his keyboard. What would you say the goal of the magazine is?
So I guess it's got a lot of goals, really. It's first and foremost sort of highlight, herpetoculture, the benefits of herpetoculture within different sectors. So from zookeeping, private keeping, sort of novice, hobbyist, sort of, input, the trade, things like that, and to try and make sense of basically a quite a holistic sort of picture but also to improve husbandry standards. Realistically, we're not going to turn around and say that that there is a right way to do everything and that we know all the secrets and that's that. But I think by having a platform that we do go and get multiple perspectives from different experts, and we do have a vet on board who's writing pieces about health concerns with maybe more sort of core species, and we are sort of vetting that information in a way. We do hope to improve husbandry standards.
Hmm.
It's like, as you say, it's accessible. There's a lot of just gets delivered straight to your door. People buy into it. A lot of colleges and stuff are sort of supportive of EK. They use it as an educational resource. And likewise, we've done a lot of stories with students that are, doing their university degrees and things like that, or college degrees with a particular species. We're speaking to different people in the institution and trying to paint these pictures for them. So yeah, there's I guess improving the husbandry standards, connecting hobbyists in a
Hmm.
way that sort of makes sense and is easy to digest, and then yeah, highlighting sort of overlooked conservation programs, because so many conservation successes, really quite incredible conservation successes, are often overlooked by media for sort of more charismatic megafauna. Like we all know this with reptiles and amphibians, you can have a highly endangered species of I don't know, frog that's been bred somewhere, and a really robust reintroduction program, and something that if this same program had been established for something that was more appealing to the mass media, would be all over the sort of national newspapers. But unfortunately, the little brown frog that nobody cares about doesn't get that sort of attention. So okay, EK is not, a global sort of huge mega company for news, but it does allow hobbyists that are already somewhat interested in herpetoculture, whether it's that they've bought their first leopard gecko, or that they're, an experienced breeder of a really niche turtle species, to go, okay, well, this little brown frog, what can we learn from this, and can we support that in any way? And yeah, I think it's all good publicity for programs that are very often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely, and it just brings it all into one spot. And like I said, there's something more rigorous to a magazine that's put together aesthetically, and you know that there's some thought that's gone behind it, and I think that's really valuable right now in our community, and making sure that the info that's getting shared is not necessarily been vetted, but also been reviewed, and like I said, there's just a process to building a magazine that's a lot more valuable to me than just making a post. And so I think that's awesome. As far as some logistics, I have two questions. One, if someone was interested in actually contributing in some way, how would they do that? And then two, what about people wanting to consume the magazine? How do they subscribe?
So yeah, if somebody wants to contribute to the magazine, then they only have to drop me an email. It's thomas@exoticskeeper.com. I don't know whether you'll put this out on anywhere where there's going to be some links or something
Yes,
somewhere,
yeah, I'll
but
put links. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, anyone that's got an interesting story to tell, please do get in touch. There's I'm open to a lot of suggestions with these sort of things. There's some people have sort of approached me in the past with ideas. Oh, I don't know if this is quite right. And I'm like, that is perfect. That is a
Yeah.
brilliant story. And equally, some people have said, I'm not an excellent writer, but I've done this really cool thing, and I'll jump on the phone, jump onto a call, and do an interview, and we'll work together on an article. So yeah, anyone that has a contribution to herpetoculture and wants to share that within EK, just drop me an email. In terms of reading it, it's actually free for digital subscriptions now. So if you visit www.exoticskeeper.com/sign up, it's you basically give us your email and you will join our mailing list for the digital subscription. Obviously, in the UK, you can also pay for a printed subscription. We've not quite sort of gone overseas yet, but
Is that
it
in the
will.
works?
we'd love to do it, and it's something that we've sort of considered for a while, but we really want, that sort of global support. If we can get enough sort of sign-ups in terms of digital subscriptions, and we can seriously justify reaching out to a printer, or if you are a printer that we're based in the US that would like to manage the distribution of this project, then yeah, definitely get in touch. But
Yeah, because you wouldn't have to have it printed in the UK and shipped over here. You could find a printer to print them here and distribute it on in North America.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, if there's a way to make that happen, it's something that's not, been enough of a priority for us yet. But it is something we'd love to look into. And as I say, as we're branching out and doing more sort of international sort of content with other people, and speaking to yourself and things like that, then there's definitely more scope to hopefully yeah, print and distribute abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anybody listening, I mean, go sign up for the free. I mean, most people are going to be in the States that are listening to this. If you're in the UK, you can. I mean, I think the magazine's like, is it £4? It's pretty cheap and
Yeah,
free shipping.
yeah. So it's 3.99 if you pay monthly. You end up saving about 20% if you buy the annual subscription. So then as soon as you order, the first issue goes through our sort of warehouse, so you get that pretty much straight away, and then it's usually within the first, but depending on the sort of weekends and how the weekends lie in terms of printing, sometimes the second week of each month they're on. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
can be easier.
So
Yeah.
if you're in the UK, you can get the digital copy. But if you are anywhere else, then sign up for the free copy. Like I said, it's a really fun magazine to read, and it reminds me of being a kid getting those old magazines. And I think, like, I don't know, I keep harping on this point, but I think it's so important that we head back this way. And I had Dr. Zach Loafman on a couple weeks ago, just talking about the book that he put out, and I think there's something nice about having tangible information in your hands that you can, and create a nice little collection of magazines for yourself too. You guys also just went through a pretty massive project as far as like a survey. So can we talk about the survey? Some people would have seen me share it on Instagram, or you shared on Instagram as well. I would love to know what the reason for doing that survey was, and what scope it had.
Yeah, so the survey itself was, to our knowledge, actually the biggest survey that's ever been held on the keeping of reptiles and amphibians. It's the purpose of it really was to just learn more. We in Europe are very much sort of threatened by positive lists. It's an ongoing discussion. Well, I suppose it's not just Europe, is it? It's internationally. Anywhere where there's a sort of thriving herpetoculture scene, discussions around positive lists are growing. There's obviously a million reasons why they could be detrimental to animal welfare, and it's something that we can't really fight unless we know enough about what's what's being kept, um, before we can even put any kind of case forward.
Mhm.
So that was the initial sort of reasoning behind the survey. Obviously, the more information that we can gather, then the more the more we can learn about the hobby itself. So we've managed to figure out quite a few interesting things, and in doing so, we're going to be publishing a report hopefully this side of Christmas. I'm working on it now. There'll be a feature in EK magazine that sort of goes into a lot of detail, and we're hoping to work alongside students to publish an academic paper. We're also going to be combining that information with another survey. So the Federation of British Herpetologists, the FBH, also run a survey each year, or it could be every other year, but it's on now. So anyone that's listening to this, also please do go and contribute to that survey, because they're capturing different data to us, and they've been doing it for a long time. So by combining our data, sending it to a professional analyst, and we can really paint a picture of what's being kept here in the UK. We've also had quite a few responses from people internationally, but we were in a really fortunate position to be able to incentivize everyone. So in the past, so these surveys, maybe incentivized in the form of a few Amazon vouchers that are being given out to a few lucky
like a draw.
participants.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, so for a lot of people, that's not enough of an incentive. And so we were we hadn't planned really on going digital and giving away any free subscriptions until this point. And we said, right, okay, what can EK do to incentivize everyone and gather that information that's going to be used by the likes of the FBH, Responsible Reptile Keeping, the IHS, the International Herpetological Society, Repta, Cask, a bunch of other sort of organisations here in the UK. So at that point, we said, okay, anyone that submits a survey can also get a free digital subscription. We gave away £1,000 store credit to one lucky participant, and yeah, it really drove our response rate up. So we ended up with, I think it was, around about sort of 7,000 participants total. It was 6,000, about 6,500 in the UK. I've got the actual figures here. So it was 6,465 unique individuals that filled out the survey. And they are keepers of reptiles, amphibians, and inverts. And 5,652 individuals keeping just reptiles and amphibians.
Mm.
So yeah, it was massive. It's our best sort of picture of the industry or the hobby that we have at the minute, and yeah, it was a massive success. Really, we actually went about sort of marketing it in quite an interesting way. So we printed something like almost like just under, I think it was like about 500,000 stickers, QR codes that went out onto live food tubs.
Mm.
So these live food tubs obviously distributed across the country, different pet shops. We also had a lot of support from like yourself, bloggers and podcasts and institutions and different organizations that sort of really promoted it. So we got a lot of sort of oomph behind it, which did us, a massive favor, and we reached a lot of people. And yeah, we're now at a point where we can start sharing that information.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I'm glad that you guys got that many responses, and I think that's genius to be able to offer the digital subscription with as an incentive. I mean, I knew that, like, when I did it, I thought I would just get one copy, like the month of the month that I did the survey. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. I get the July month or whatever it was, and then the August one came, and then September. I'm like, oh, I guess I just keep getting this thing. It was an amazing value. I mean, and now obviously people can go sign up, but that was, I think, a great way to get people to do it. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about what data, like what you discovered with the data you captured.
Yeah. Okay. So straight off the top, I guess demographic wise, we found out that we actually had most respondents were female, so 51%.
Interesting.
Yeah, 46% male, and then 3% were like sort of non-disclosed or non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of kind of interesting. Again, like good representation from females, certainly within our data set, but it again paints a picture of reptile keeping and perhaps what people who aren't involved in the hobby might perceive and sort of a more male dominated thing. People keeping sort of large constrictors, and that's what a pet snake looks like, and that's the sort of thing. And in actual fact, when we look at exotics keeping broadly, through our data anyway, mostly female. So that was interesting. We also found that the age that was most represented within our data, so I guess the most popular age within the survey, was 23 years old. But then when we actually break it down and look at the average age of an exotic pet keeper, including inverts, they're 34 years old. So again, another interesting little bit of information there. Perhaps not that surprising. We found that lizard owners ended up on average being the youngest demographic, whereas like chelonia, turtle and tortoise owners were the oldest, so they were 39.1. 39.1. Lizard keepers average age of 32. there was a few anomalies in it. So, for example, we found that crocodilian keepers were, in actual fact, the oldest. They had an average age of 42, but we only had 5 unique owners. So
Okay.
it's sort of, you know what I mean. There's a few areas in there that we have to
A little
expect
underpowered.
being an
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So like even when we look at, for example, like the unique, so we've got like so we have 5,652 unique individuals keeping reptiles and amphibians. Then when we break that down, so we had 88% were keeping lizards, 35% were keeping snakes, 15% were keeping tortoises, 13% keeping frogs and toads, 4% keep turtles, 4% keep newts and salamanders. Now that obviously doesn't add up because we've got people that are keeping more than one.
Right.
So um that like it's interesting to know that even though there's a huge like demographic of people that are keeping multiple sort of groups of taxa or animals within different groups, lizards massively dominated, or lizard keepers massively dominated our sort of statistics, which when we compare that to the FBH's data, they had majority of keepers kept snakes. So this is where we then start to then sort of break down our methods of promoting the survey. And obviously, with more than 500,000 stickers going out on live foods,
Right. Right.
there's going to be an aspect of some of it perhaps being not necessarily biased, but are we capturing that full picture in the same way? So that's why it's really important that we work alongside the FBH, alongside other surveys that have also been held, that and figure that out. And yeah, and then obviously with outside of that group, we saw that actually there was one person keeping Sicilians. There's a few people keeping crocodilians. They don't actually make up really a percentage within that data, so that's the sort of headline figures. But like species wise, it was interesting to know what's actually being kept out there. So
Yeah.
we had, I believe eight it was over 800 different species of reptiles and amphibians being kept, and
Wow.
that was internationally. So there was a few species that were being kept primarily out of the country. Like there was just no keepers within the UK, but there was still massive diversity within the UK of what people are keeping. Um, and yeah, a total of 39,673 animals were recorded, which is a huge number of animals. And that obviously helps us then actually try and quantify just how many exotic pets are being kept in the country. So,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah, like at one point, the PFMA, which is a Pet Food Manufacturing Association, I think, they basically called up something like 8,000 households and asked them whether what pets they keep. And that sort of created a formula whereby, they figured out that 1.4% of households had a pet snake, 1.8 had a pet lizard, and we can now use that alongside our data to come up with an estimation of what's actually being kept. Now, a few different organizations have had different thoughts, and some of them have been, you know, like immense numbers, huge numbers, which, without a really robust data set to figure it out, that's what we're running with, because we're using FBH data that perhaps um, was tailored more towards specialist keepers that had numerous animals, and
Mm.
it was really hard to get like a like real focus on what the reality of that picture is, because the date the people that were responding to it probably had collections or were breeders or had businesses involved in it and had multiple animals, whereas ours was on live food tubs and had an incentive for a free magazine to everyone. So hopefully we managed to capture some good data from people who were pet keepers. They might have a bearded dragon at home, or maybe a couple of animals, but essentially a broader range of people.
Well, and just the process of doing the survey caters more to people who aren't huge breeders, because you're going through that thing. You'd have to be like, okay, one ball python, two ball, like it would take you a while. So
Yeah.
if you're a person that has 4 or 5 animals, you go through there, boom, and so you're probably capturing the pet keeper audience more than the industry side.
Yeah, absolutely. And we made it really important. We knew it was important to basically not give people survey fatigue. We know the FBH have been doing their data collection for a long time, and it's a really robust um, method of collecting data. But for us, we had some input from different specialists across the UK who were saying, we could really do with information on how animals are being kept, things like obesity levels and stuff like that in certain species. And what we've done is we've taken a slightly different approach. So we tried to make the survey as simple as possible. It's basically a drop down menu of all the animals. We collated information from all animals that had been sold by one of the major sort of wholesalers in the UK. Also, all the animals that had been rehomed in one of the major rescue and rehome centres.
Mm.
All the animals that had ever been imported through different import data. So we had a pretty big picture of what was possibly being kept, and it was just a menu. You click what's being kept, how many, name, email, like easy enough. So people weren't looking at it going, oh no, like, after a few scrolls, clicking off somewhere else. So the idea being that we get as many people on board initially, and then if, for example, we find ourselves in a position where we go, right, we know obesity and bearded dragons is a serious issue,
Mm.
something we need to combat, then we can say, right, well, we have X amount of thousand bearded dragon owners that we can email directly and say, look, this is a serious problem that we really need to address. Your data will be massively valued. We can potentially incentivize it with, the support of other sort of industry leaders and, businesses and stuff within the UK, and get that data that way, rather than sort of starting from scratch and having this uphill battle of trying to get people to send photographs of their setups, of their diet routine, as soon as you ask somebody to go and pick up their bearded dragon, weigh the bearded dragon, measure it, like, unfortunately, it would be great if every sort of pet owner has kept their animals to the same sort of standard as zoological collections or expert breeders, where there is that sort of data set, but most people don't. um, that as soon as they're confronted with that additional task to try and get that data, then it's very possible that you would lose them.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so we now have the opportunity to sort of target that demographic and ask them, present like a very plausible argument and try and make it easier for them because it's already sitting in their inbox, or so it's
That's really cool.
yeah, it's really interesting. And the data set itself, I've got a few notes to be able to talk you through, but I sometimes can sit there for hours just flicking through going, oh, okay, well, I never knew that particular species of poison frog is being kept in the UK. Oh, like, like these really interesting things. Like we've had some really bizarre species and quite like big numbers of them
Hmm.
sort of coming in, and you go, wow, like that is just not something that you'd have thought of. um, and yeah, it paints a good picture. You look at the ages that people are acquiring their animals, and then suddenly they're not keeping them at this age, or you're looking at different areas where even from an EK perspective you can start saying, right, okay, well, um, is there a way that we can tailor our content because we've got however many people are keeping this species, but it's somewhat underrepresented in the sort of mainstream conversation. Like, should we be considering this species as actually a core species?
Hmm.
You know, yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's really cool, and hopefully, as I say, there'll be a full report that we can, that we'll be publishing ASAP. Soon we're going to be having like a full list of the species available on the UK website. That's the
Okay,
next
cool.
step. So anyone that wants to just take a flick through and go and see this the species list and the number kept, that's all we're doing for a start. Until the sort of report comes out with more sort of robust data. Um, then it will be there for people to just see, and even sort of people that are doing their PhD thesis and they need that data, and there's some support there for academic research on that side of things. We've managed to make a contribution to that.
Yeah, it's very cool. Were the most popular species just kind of what anybody would expect, or was there, maybe you could list some of the popular ones, and then if there were any things that popped up where you're like, wow, I can't believe that's that high on the list?
Yeah, sure. So, to be honest, a lot of it was kind of predictable, but then there was interesting sort of like differences between, for example, we have the top five species per group based on the number of unique owners is often very different to the top five species of each group based on the number of animals kept.
Right.
So, for example, frogs and toads are top three. Number one, white tree frogs. Number two, horned frogs, and number three, the Dendrobates tinctorius. Azaraeus is actually miles ahead of the dying category that we put on there, but either way, it still comes in at number three. But then, for example, you look at I might get the actual report up.
Sure.
But then, yes, and then, but then on the species per group based on the number of animals, your number one is still white tree frogs, but then number two, Oriental fire-bellied toads. So obviously, there's a lot of people keeping more fire-bellied toads. And yeah, horned frogs aren't even third. The third it's poison frogs. So I mean, it makes sense because horned frogs, I imagine, well, everyone should be keeping them sort of solitarily.
Mm-hmm.
So that completely changes things. Within newts and salamanders, number one for the number of unique owners, axolotl, followed by barred fire salamanders, and then eastern tiger salamanders. But then when we look at the sort of number of animals, number one is axolotl, but number two is Kaiser newts, which is there must be some pretty robust breeding projects going on out there where these highly endangered newts are actually being bred in really really good numbers to the point where they're actually the second most populous newt slash salamander in the UK. Like it's amazing. Like it's just insight into something that we just didn't know before. And then there are obviously like some that are kind of predictable. So like tortoises, Hermann's tortoises, most popular, Horsfield second, Greek's Berthide third. In terms of how populous they are, again, Hermann's, Horsfield, but then Redfoot's. Yeah, and then lizards, again, kind of predictable. Bearded dragons, leopard geckos, crested geckos in
Mm-hmm.
both categories. Snakes, number one. Well, in fact, yeah, in both the number of unique owners and the number of animals kept, we've got royal pythons number one, corn snakes number two, and western hognose number three. So those sort of things, yeah, there's some predictability in it. But then when you look at the hundreds and hundreds of different species of animals that are being kept, that in itself is just startling, like huge numbers. Yeah, and it poses more questions. It just gives us a starting point to start analyzing how things are, in the
Yeah.
UK.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, like you said, it's a good starting point. Who knows what you can do with that data? You can break it up into so many different ways. We can actually cater messages towards the populace, the amount of animals, the most popular species, and yeah, I think that is incredible. And so moving forward, that data will be published for people to see, and then I guess, like you said, you're probably going to share that data with institutions and whatnot. People are doing master's projects and whatnot for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's full transparency. From day one, we said this is for the benefit of everyone, really. Anyone that can use this data in a productive way that sort of benefits herpetoculture. Yeah, it's available. It's there. At the minute, we're still cleaning this up. We need to make sure that there's obviously no like personal data or anything there. So the report is the main thing. We get that out through EK, but it'll also be downloadable for people to use. And we know that all of that is obviously very robust data that we've published ourselves. But if there's other sort of data and an individual or an institution can find a use for it and they want to request it from us, yeah, absolutely, they can have access to it. We just need to reformat it. So,
yeah. Amazing. Well, Thomas, you're up to so many interesting projects. I think all of these are going to lead towards a better herpetoculture community, and obviously the end of the day is always attempting to improve the welfare of the animals that we keep, so that's really cool. Is there anything that we left on the table that you wanted to mention before we wrap up? We're coming almost to the end of the 90 minutes.
I think that's about it, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I could ramble on forever about the data that we've collected and some of the interesting points from it, but maybe I can just leave that for people to read themselves as and when the report comes out, hopefully in the next couple of months.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people will be able to scour through that data and pick out some interesting things. And but I think like it's an incredible amount of work that you guys are able to do, and capture that data is so important. So can you let everybody know where they can find you on Instagram, as well as any of the EK stuff and all the abilities to subscribe and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram, Exotics Keeper is at Exotics Keeper. Website is exoticskeeper.com. Facebook, you can find us under Exotics Keeper. You're more than welcome to drop me a message or follow on my personal Insta. That's at Tom Marriott with zeros instead of the O, just to make things a bit more complicated. But yeah, all of that's there. If you'd like to get in touch, or you've got any article ideas, you want to know anything else about the survey, please do just drop us a message or an email, or
Awesome. Well, Thomas, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for jumping on an episode today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dylan. It's been great to talk to you.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation. And again, I know I keep mentioning it, but I love the concept of a magazine. I know this is not a new concept. Magazines are hundreds of years old, but it's just nice to see herpetoculture going back to that and having a way that it's feasible to do. And I keep mentioning it, but there's a certain rigor and robustness that comes from physically publishing content that you just cannot get in just simple, basic online discourse. Nothing wrong with online discourse, but I think magazines and books take it to the next level. So thank you so much for that. Listeners, there's no reason you shouldn't be subscribed to the free issue of EK Magazine, so make sure you go do that. All the links to get that done are in the show notes. And again, if you are working on a very interesting project at home, and I know many of you are, there might be a potential for you to actually contribute to the magazine by either writing something yourself or getting interviewed by Thomas. So if you do have something you're working on, just keep in the back of your head that this could be something that you share with the greater community at some point in the future. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it on social media. I will always, or I shouldn't say always, but I really try my best to reshare when things get shared. As long as I get tagged and I'm notified, I will do that. If you're looking for more information on the podcast, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. You can also join us over at Patreon at patreon.com/animalsathome. And thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring the set behind me. All these beautiful enclosures are all custom reptile habitat enclosures. You can find more information about them and their products at the affiliate link, which is in the show notes, as well as the YouTube description. If you use that link to enter their store and you make a purchase, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And that is a very simple way that you can both support your animals at home as well as the podcast financially. And I do really appreciate every time I see one of those links get used, because it really lets me know that A, their animal is getting upgraded, and B, I'm able to continue turning the lights on in this room and producing the podcast that everybody enjoys, or hopefully enjoys. Anyway, I will catch you guys in the next episode.